Marilyn Monroe died alone of a drugs overdose. That's the official version. But what if it's not true? What if she was murdered? What if all this time the murderer was hiding in plain sight? Time to examine the evidence here on Things Visible and Invisible. Mike Rothmiller is a New York Times best-selling author, as well as a nominee for the Pulitzer Prize. In addition, he has worked as an historian, army medic, TV reporter, television host, and as a producer for award-winning documentaries. And if all that wasn't enough, before all of that, he was a detective with the LAPD, which has a particular relevance to one of his best-selling books, Bombshell, The Night Bobby Kennedy Killed Marilyn Monroe. And he joins me down the line from his home in Arizona. Mike, welcome back to Things Visible and Invisible.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Mike, the title of your book is Bombshell, and that's putting it mildly.
It sums it up.
Well,
we told.
Well, let's before we get into what your researches showed. Let's look at the official version. Now, the official version is that Marilyn Monroe died in August 1962. She had a very difficult life and she had a tragic death. She died of a drugs overdose alone, and the rest has become part of the myth and the legend around Marilyn Monroe. What you're proposing in this book is not only a different narrative to that, but something which I think the word bombshell really does sum it up.
Yes, and the reason being, it's different from what actually happened is that I was working in intelligence, and what we learn in intelligence is generally a lot different from what goes out publicly. And LAPD was involved in the cover-up, and actually, if you want to say the death of Marilyn Monroe. And so they, for better terms, scripted the investigation and what was going to happen as far as news releases. They had the coroner involved and everything, what was going to be said, and they destroyed a lot of evidence. So the official story that was given is not what actually happened.
Okay, well let's get into what had happened, but let's do a little bit of the background to this, because we've got the Kennedys and we've got Monroe. Where is the nexus? How did Marilyn Monroe come into the orbit of the Kennedys?
Well, she really came into it through Peter Lawford, who was a brother-in-law to John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, and they provided the introduction for the two. And it was at Peter Lawford's house, and Marilyn was invited over. That's where she met John Kennedy, and then she met Robert Kennedy later on. But it goes further back than that, when LAPD intelligence was running surveillances on Peter Lawford and the Kennedys when they came to Los Angeles. And this went on before JFK was president. When he was a senator, he was very close with the chief of police of Los Angeles. And so the chief of police always arranged for him to have a room at the Biltmore Hotel, was comped from the chief. And then the chief of police and the captain of LAPD intelligence would supply him and his brother, Bobby, when he came, whatever they wanted. Now, generally that included women. And so they would bring some women in. And that's where it all began years prior to Marilyn coming into the picture. But then Marilyn was introduced, and it just flourished from that point on.
But just on that, Mike, first of all, Peter Lawford was part of the Kennedy family through marriage, was an actor, an English actor living in Hollywood. So he had the entree into that whole world of Hollywood, which the Kennedys were then able to access. But answer me this now: you've worked in intelligence, you've worked in policing. What was in it for the LAPD to have this kind of link, rather sordid link, with politicians?
Well, it's very basic, and that came down to power, because LAPD intelligence started in 1932, and theoretically, what they're supposed to be doing is gathering intelligence on the mafia. But their their thrust was keeping the Eastern Mafia out of Los Angeles so the Los Angeles Mafia could prosper. And so what happened is during that same time, they started gathering intelligence on all politicians that wielded any power because you want to be able to control them, especially if you need them at times. And so anybody wielded power in Southern California, they were gathering intelligence on. And that was being done through surveillances, through informants, through illegal wiretaps, through what are called black bag jobs, or they break into the person's business or residence and see what they can find out. And that was done for the main politicians, judges, congressmen, senators, the governor of California, and then it expanded to anybody in the country that wielded power. That included presidents they gather intelligence on. And what they wanted was intelligence that could severely, in a negative way, impact their future, their political career, their movie career, television, whatever it was. Because when you need somebody to be a friend, all you have to do is say, hey, we know about this affair you were having with this woman. Don't worry, it's our secret. It's safe with us. And that's how it would be handled. And then they'd say, by the way, can you do this favor for us? And I saw that happen to some very powerful people that were, if you want to say, they were squeezed to do what the LAPD wanted. And they did. And they did that for many, many years. And so that's how this whole situation with the Kennedys and Monroe and Peter Lawford, it all came up because the Kennedys wielded a lot of power. Even before they got into office, Marilyn Monroe was a big name. Peter Lawford was also in Hollywood and was a brother-in-law to John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. And so he was of vital interest too to gather information on. And so that's what LAPD ended up having. We had some dossiers on the mafia, but we had many, many more on individuals who weren't criminals, but they were very powerful people.
Right.
And that's who they wanted to have the intelligence on.
Let's also set the scene a little bit, Mike, in terms of Marilyn Monroe. I mean, by the time she met the Kennedys, we're talking the late 50s, I would imagine, she was a huge star. But that stardom came in the early 50s, I guess, and by the end of the 50s, it was beginning to wane a little bit. She was notoriously difficult to work with, some say, and she had a lot going on in her private life, I think we can honestly say. I mean, what sort of psychological, emotional state was this woman in when she encountered the Kennedy brothers?
Well, she was under the care of a psychiatrist at the time, and she was taking medications for it. But she was also still very active in Hollywood, and she was an extremely well-known personality. So anything that she was going to do, if go out in public or go to a party, people recognized her, and she was the anchor that drew people into that particular party at another celebrity's house. So um, she was, she wasn't. A lot of people say, well, she wasn't bright, and that's not what I saw intelligence-wise. She was bright, but also she was vulnerable, and she would, for whatever reason she would allow her body to be used by powerful men if she wanted to be close to them or get to know them or be friends with them, whatever it may be. She had her reasons for doing it, and that's what happened with JFK and Robert Kennedy.
Mike, were these the first politicians that she had really encountered in Hollywood?
No, she met other ones through the movie industry and through the heads of the studio. She met the governor, she had met congressmen, senators, and so forth. And that continued throughout her career, but that is not unusual for a major star in Hollywood. They'll always encounter these people. And so that's what it was, but it was more of just a friendship or just acknowledgement that, yeah, I met you, I know you, and we know each other now. There was nothing sexually involved.
So what year are we talking about when she first encounters the Kennedys?
That would have been late 50s, early 60s.
Right. So just prior to John Kennedy becoming president.
Correct.
Right. So I mean, now John F. Kennedy's dalliances are well recorded, and they seem to be endless. So it's no real surprise that perhaps Marilyn Monroe would come across his radar. What was the substance of that relationship? Was it just a dalliance on the part of John Kennedy and quickly moving on?
Pretty much. We had letters from John Kennedy during World War II between him and his brother that was serving in the war. And they were, for a better term, having a contest, see who could bed so and so, different women. And it always seemed to be a contest that was instilled in them by their father, who was doing the same thing when they were growing up. And so uh, Marilyn, he met her and he saw, hey, here's a beautiful woman. Maybe I'll have another conquest that I can potentially brag to my brothers about. And so that seems to be what actually happened. It wasn't that he had a true interest in her. It was just, here's somebody else who I can have sex with and then move on.
And how did this leave Marilyn?
Well, from reading her diary, which LAPD intelligence had a copy of, she was very upset about it. Because what happened is that Peter Lawford came in and said, hey, you can't speak to the president any longer. You can't call him at the White House, so on. It's over. Then Bobby stepped in to kind of smooth things over, and then he got involved with her. And so that kind of tamped the situation down for a while. But then it came up that he wasn't going to see her anymore. And she was calling the Attorney General's office, that was his office, not getting a return call. And at that stage, especially reading the diary and reading some of the wiretaps on her house, she was getting very upset. She was now a scorned woman, and she was not going to take that. Um, and so that was her emotional situation. It wasn't that she was breaking down, crying and everything. She was getting angry.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Kennedy's, as John Kennedy moves away and Robert Kennedy moves into the picture, do you think that was a political move, a cynical move to kind of keep her quiet, to sort of hope that she'll go away quietly?
It was probably twofold. One, that was it. It was political because that would have ended the presidency, the administration, if it came out in the 60s, the president's having an affair. And then Robert had a number of affairs too. And so he kind of, I think, looked at the situation and said, well, I'm here. Yeah, she's a beautiful woman. And why don't I get involved with her? And so that went on for a short period of time. And then it was a matter of how are we going to tap this whole thing down that she's getting angry? And she was letting it be known that she was getting angry over this entire situation. So it stepped it up, the need to do something about it.
And also, Mike, I mean, you alluded to it earlier, she was under the care of a psychiatrist. She had a history of depression and emotional states of one sort or another. I mean, presumably this type of activity at this time, do you think, did it exacerbate whatever sort of her weak state of mind was at that time? I know you said she was angry, but she was also volatile, unstable at times as well.
I think it added to it. Everything was just coming to a head, and it was more than she could handle at the time. And the way it was going to be expressed is through, if you want to say vengeance, because she planned on having a news conference and telling everything she knew about the Kennedys and their affair.
Really?
Yeah, so that was picked up on a wiretap. And her friends that she told that to told her, don't do it. Don't do that. Whatever you do, just keep quiet because you're treading in a dangerous area by doing that. And she insisted she was going to do it. And those phone calls were a relatively short period of time before her death.
Do you think she would have actually gone through with that?
That's hard to say. I wouldn't be surprised if she did, because she would have made a couple more calls, maybe to the Attorney General's office. She would have certainly spoken to Peter Lawford more about it. and said, listen, I'm going to do this. You tell them they have to contact me or whatever she wanted. And I think that's probably the route she would have taken. I don't think she would have just arbitrarily overnight decided, okay, I'm going to do it now. And then she does it. I think she would have reached out and given them an ultimatum. I'm going to do this unless you do whatever.
The name Peter Lawford has cropped up a number of times in our conversation, Mike. What was his relationship with Marilyn? Was he a friend or was he just an enabler?
I think he was probably both, but I think he was more of a friend than not because he's the one that introduced them. And there was a time when Kennedy was president, he would come out and stay at Peter Lawford's house. He had a beach house. And what would happen, this Secret Service would set up a perimeter to protect him, but LAPD intelligence was there too, watching to see what was going to go on, see who was going to come to the house or leave. And one evening, was late afternoon, the LAPD intelligence guys are on a hill, they're watching, and they see a man climbing out of the window, side window, Peter Lawford's house. And they said, what's going on? So they're watching, and they see him go across, climb a fence, walk down Pacific Coast Highway, and they have binoculars. Said, my God, that's the president. He's sneaking out. And they saw a car pull up. He got in it. The car picked him up. They drove away. So they happened to get down there quickly, and they were following the car. And it was a female star. I'll put it that way. Picked up Kennedy and went to her house. And so they were at her house, and they went to the neighbor's house because you didn't have cell phones in those days. We need to use your phone. And they called LAPD intelligence headquarters, said, get a hold of the Secret Service, ask them if they know where Kennedy's at. And they did that, and they came back and said, well, Secret Service said he's in the house, in Peter Lawford's house. I said, you better check again because we're in Beverly Hills and we're watching him. And so it was an interesting situation because he snuck out, but that was one of the times he also saw Marilyn. So he snuck out to see this woman, and then he later on, Marilyn and some other people came over to Lawford's house where he saw her that evening. So it was an interesting situation, and he was not above even being the president, taking some interesting side activities while he was in California. Well, they were having conversations, and it was decided that Peter had to go speak with her because he was a friend. And he met with her, and she, at that time, said, hey, I'm tired of being used, basically, and I'm not going to stand for this. So he, in turn, contacted JFK and told him what was going on. And he said he thought maybe they could tap it down if Bobby would come and talk to her. And so they got a hold of her and said, Bobby's coming. As a matter of fact, she made that notation in her diary that Bobby was coming out that night. And so Bobby did come out. When he was in Northern California, he did secretly fly down in the afternoon to Santa Monica Airport in LAX, that area. And Lawford picked him up, and then they had another conversation of what to do. And when they picked him up, he was being surveilled by LAPD intelligence at the time. And so they went to Lawford's house, then they went to Marilyn's house in the afternoon. And they started having a talk, but that turned into a huge argument. They left. They came back later in the evening. Peter called, talked to her, said, we want to come back again. So they came back later in the evening. And that was conversations picked up on the bugs, the microphones that were planted in her house and in Peter's house by a guy named Fred Otash. And so those were all recorded. And at that stage, that's when they had a huge argument, a little bit of a physical one, where he pushed her down, knocked her down, and they began searching the house, they being RFK and Peter Lawford. They began searching, just going through the house looking for things. And as Peter Lawford told me, he says, we were looking for anything that tied her to the Kennedys in any fashion, photographs, notes, anything you can imagine. And so they were collecting things, and she was following them from room to room, yelling at them, "Get out of my stuff," and so forth. And it got very, very heated, the conversation or the argument. And Peter finally separated them in the house, took Marilyn out to the living room, set her on the sofa, was talking to her, while Bobby was still going through the house looking for things.
Well, what exactly was he looking? Sorry, Mike. What exactly was he looking for? Was he looking for just any sort of evidence connecting the Kennedys to Marilyn Monroe?
Anything. Photographs. A lot of people have said that, well, he was looking for her diary. Well, you're only going to look for a diary if you know somebody keeps a diary. And there was never any evidence that that was ever discussed with them, the diary, as far as on wiretaps or anything like that. But she did keep a diary. So that was kind of known through her friends and so forth. And so anything that connected them to Marilyn, they were looking for to get rid of. And so that night, as the arguments continued, Peter was talking to Marilyn on the sofa. Bobby goes into the kitchen, and Peter said he was wondering what he's doing. So he went in there, and he had a glass, a clear glass. Excuse me. He thought he had water in it, but he's got a spoon. He's stirring it, and it's just clear color. And so he says, "I know something was in it, but he said, I didn't know what it was or didn't think much of it." They go back out. They start talking to Marilyn. She's sitting there. "Here, take this, drink it down. You'll feel better." Peter thought it was a sedative because he knew she took sedatives. And he thought, okay, this should calm her down. And so they're talking to her. She drinks it down with Peter's insistence. And then they start searching the house again. And she's getting upset again. But he sets her back down. She stays there. They go into the other rooms. They're looking. And when they come back out, Peter said she was sitting on the sofa, but she looked like she was out of it, asleep. He wasn't quite sure. So he looked closer at her and he realized, oh, wait a minute. No. This looks really bad. She looks more than just asleep. And so he says, about that time, he said, he hears a knock at the front door and he panics because he says, I was positive as the police came because the neighbors called, they heard the screaming going on. And so he says, with that, he says, Bobby says, we got to go. He grabs on this, come on, we got to go. And he said, well, what about Marilyn? And he says, just don't worry about it. Just, we got to go. And Peter said, they go to the front door and he opens it. And these two men are standing there just wearing plain clothes and no uniforms or anything. And he says, I wasn't sure who they were, but he says, he says it was bizarre. There were no words exchanged. He says, we walked out and they walked in and into the house and closed the door. So we got in the car and he said, I asked Bob, I said, who are they? He said, never mind, we got to go to the airport. And so he says, they got in the car and they're driving away. So when I'm talking to Peter, I asked him, I said, did you recognize one of those guys, either one of them or both of them? He said, one guy I saw before. I've seen him before around the Kennedys. And I said, do you remember a name? No. And I said, well, if I gave you some names, you think might jog your memory? He says, okay. So I started giving him names. No. And I said, how about a guy last name of Hamilton? And he said, that's it. That's the guy. He says, he was always with Bobby and Jack when he was just a senator. And I said, well, do you know what this Hamilton does? He says, I know. Yeah, he's a cop. And I said, he's the captain of LAPD intelligence. He's the head of it. And I said, he's the one who came to the house. And he said, yeah. And so he told me that. Then I knew, okay, LAPD intelligence was involved from the beginning on this as far as a cover-up.
Mike, a lot of people listening to you will say this is a very, very gripping tale, and that is true. However, they will ask, What is Mike's research in this? What is his evidence for this? So talk to me a little bit about your researches, who you spoke to. You've alluded to a number of times conversations with Peter Lawford. What other evidence have you amassed that makes you so clear of what the events of that night in August 1962?
Excellent question. First, I had access to all of LAPD intelligence, and that information has never been released. And that included surveillance photographs of the Kennedys in Maryland. That included the wiretaps, included the bugs that planted in the house. I had access to all that. One of my informants was Fred Otash. Fred Otash is a guy who planted the bugs and put the wiretaps on Peter Lawford's house and on Marilyn's house. He was under per bedroom contract to the CIA and to Jimmy Hoffa, the head of Teamsters Union, to do this. And also the FBI was paying him. But he said he was giving everything to LAPD intelligence because we were the hometown muscle and he couldn't get away with anything. So, excuse me, he was an informant. I talked to him a lot about it and really put the squeeze on him about the information. So had that. And then within LAPD intelligence files was a copy of Marilyn Monroe's missing diary, which how it got in there, I'm not sure. I just don't know. But a copy was there. I took handwritten notes verbatim out of her diary about Kennedy's and other issues, and all that's in the book. Then in the spring of '82, I took my wife and a couple friends up to the Playboy Mansion because I had access to it because I was working intelligence. And that morning, as we were going through, I hear a TV playing in a very small room. So as my wife and her friends are being led on a tour, I go in to see what the TV is. And here's this guy watching TV, and it's Peter Lawford, which surprised me. He was out of it at the time, drunk or on drugs. I'm not quite sure. I pulled my business cards in his pocket, in his shirt pocket. And about a week later, I get a call from him at my office. And he didn't remember meeting me. He said, I don't remember what we talked about, but I got your card. I said, yes, I know. Here's where I put the card in your pocket and so forth. And it was interesting because during that conversation, he kept asking me, he says, are you with the CIA? No, LAPD intelligence. We'd talk a bit more. And then he'd asked me again if I was with the CIA. And I said, no. And then I moved to set up a meeting, just go chat with him. So he agreed to that. We met in a park that wasn't far from the Playboy Mansion. And I'm at the park. He finally shows up. We sat down. He still doesn't remember meeting me at the Playboy Mansion, but we're talking. And I quizzed him on his memory, see how it was doing at the time. He didn't appear to be under the influence of anything when we met. And then I just started talking to him. And I asked him, I said, tell me about the night Marilyn died. And he got into a script that was partially written by LAPD intelligence. And I just cut him off. And I said, no, I'm not going to listen to that. That's the BS that was given to you. And he was kind of a little bit upset with that. And then I started pressing him more. It went from a simple interview to an interrogation, which is completely different. And he was starting to get angry and he stood up and he's going to walk away. So I stood up next to him and said, listen, and I pretty much got in his face. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm not here to investigate you. I just want to know what happened, clear up the past. And you shouldn't worry about anything because everybody's dead at that stage, except you. And so I said, you can either tell me now or the word will get out that I'm talking to you about it. And I don't know how that's going to set with you and the people you know. Anyway, he sits down and he's just quiet and he covers his face and he's just sitting there. And then he just says, what do you want to know? And it's like that hit the point where he broke. And I just started quizzing him. I said, well, tell me about it. So that's when he lays it out, what really happened, what he was involved in that night, going to Marilyn's house twice, seeing this Captain Hamilton come into the house, seeing Bobby mix something in a glass of water and give it to her. And so that's part of what he told me. And then when you couple that with Fred Otash, it really starts painting a different picture of the whole situation. And then about 10 years later, I received a telephone call from a guy, and he says, hi, are you so and so? And I said, yes. And he says, well, I'm Jack Clemens. I had no idea who he was. I didn't recognize the name. I said, okay, well, who are you? What are you talking about? He says, well, I was the first cop that got to Marilyn's house the night she died. I said, oh, okay, now I know who you are. And he said, I want to tell you what I really saw and everything that I saw and heard. But he says, I've talked to a lot of people, but he says, I've never told them what I'm going to tell you, the details. So then he starts laying it out to me what happened when he got to the house and the people that were there. And it was hours after Robert Kennedy left with Peter. And he said, I knew things were set up, but he said, I wasn't quite sure exactly how it was done. So he tells me that story, what went on that night at the house. Then he said about a short time later, he was the uniform watch commander in uniform at that station that handled that area. And he said, I was sitting there and two guys walk in wearing suits and they say, we want you to initial these photographs. And that's not what you did on LAPD. Only the person who took the photographs puts an initial on them. And so he says, what are they? So the guy pulls out an envelope and they're black and white 8x10s. And he starts going through, he says, oh, this is Marilyn's house that night in Maryland. And they say, yeah, initial them. And he says, well, why am I initialing them? Right? He was curious about this. But then he said he got to one photo and he's looking, it's Marilyn in bed and she's holding a telephone. She's dead. He says, then he looks at the next photo. It's Marilyn in bed, not holding the telephone. So he said, wait a minute. Which one is, what are you doing here? You showing me two different pictures of the same scene, but implies different things. And he said, I'm not going to initial these. And he said, the guy at that time said, no, you're going to initial them. I'm giving you a direct order to initial them. And he says, well, he goes, well, who the hell are you? He pulls it out. He says, I'm Captain Hamilton, head of intelligence. You are going to sign those, initial them. And he said he went back and forth and he really didn't. And that cost him a wealth of trouble. But also what happened within LAPD intelligence file was that the day after her death, this Captain Hamilton went to the telephone company and pulled all of the records for her phone because then they would write down if a person made a long distance call, what phone number they were calling. So he pulled all those records. He took them all. They had none. He took those and gave them to the chief of police, who was Parker at the time, and Parker kept them in his safe within LAPD headquarters. And so when I started reading all the intelligence, because the intelligence was detailed and it didn't match what was told to the public, which I'd seen in other cases already, then I knew of the cover up and I had the details that nobody else had. One was like read the diary, which everybody was looking for.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find it. Lawford, I interrogated him. He broke down. Fred Otash told me what he did as far as the bugs, the wiretaps, who was paying him to do those. And then Jack Clemens contacting me years later, really, it put everything together. And then I held that information for quite some time before I decided to do the book.
Now, your claims certainly were alluded to by Norman Mailer in his biography of Marilyn Monroe. Do you think that was he picking up on gossip and rumor in the LA area at this time?
Probably so in some respects, because there are a lot of people over the years, virtually everybody since the early 90s who wrote a book about Marilyn, they've contacted me, all the authors, and said, this is what we've heard. This is what we've been told. But it was always told by people who didn't have any inside information. And they said, would you please tell me what really happened? And I said, no, I'm just staying out of it because I wrote in the one book, my first book in the early 90s, that I read her diary because LAP Intelligence had a copy of it. And they all wanted to know, okay, well, what was in the diary? I'd never mentioned it. I never gave them details, but all of them came to me eventually. And finally, that's when I decided a few years ago, I'm going to tell the story because I want history to be correct. And I want her to be remembered the way she should be, that this wasn't a suicide.
And Mike, you're absolutely convinced that she was murdered.
She was killed. Murder, the term is, somebody went there to actually kill somebody and they do it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what was going on within RFK's mind when whatever he put in that glass, it was just, he thought, well, this would just calm her down, or maybe it was something else, and I'm going to put her over the edge. We just don't know, and nobody knows. And I think the only way it may be determined if there's another forensic autopsy done on her now, but it's so many years later, who knows how much value that would show.
So if anybody wants to find out more about the cover-up and the subsequent fallout from this, they're going to have to read your book, because we've come to the end of this episode. Mike, tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of Bombshell.
The best place would be Amazon.com, or within the U.S., Barnes & Noble, or just about any bookstore.
Mike, thank you very much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.